First step to reading sheet music is to go to sheetmusic.org and to download the software for color coordinating your sheet music. You can also purchase over 12,000 pages of color coordinated sheet music at the website as well. To first explain how I read sheet music, I've made a flowchart showing how you would read traditional sheet music and a flowchart showing how you read color coordinated music. Both of the processes are almost exactly the same. Things like rhythm and what octave you play are literally exactly the same. And you get to the same endpoint, which is you get letters and accidentals. But if you already know how to read traditional sheet music, you don't actually have to do anything to learn how to read color coordinated sheet music. You just start using it. The way you read traditional sheet music is first you count the number of dashes on the note, and then once you do that, you plug that into a table that looks like this, where the number of dashes tells you what letter the note has. So if it's on the bottom line, it will be an E for treble clef and a G for bass clef. And this table has been simplified to only show the notes that actually fall in between the staff lines, but it's actually a lot bigger because of all the notes that are above and below the staff lines. And then once you figure out what letter the note is, you find the closest accidental that's to the left of the note. And if there is an accidental to the left of the note, then you apply that sharp, flat, or natural to that note. If there is not an accidental that applies to the note, then you look to the key to see if there's an accidental that should be applied to the note. And once you do that whole process, you have the note letter and the note accidental. But with color coordinated sheet music, all you have to do is determine the color and shade of the note. You plug that color into this table, which is very simple and easy to learn. It's only 7 things. And once you do that, you get the letter, and then you plug the shade into this table, which only has 5 things, and then you have the accidental. But the important difference is the things that you can do after that. Since it's easy to compare things visually on color coordinated sheet music, you'll also be able to learn chord identification, interval identification. You can see symmetry and inversions, and it will help to unify your left and right hands. When using color coordinated music, identifying your chords is actually very easy. If you just come to the Learning tab on the website and you download this All Chords and Inversions sheet music, if all you did was memorize your major chords, you would eventually memorize all minor, diminished, and augmented chords just by practicing reading music. And if you memorized all of your major, minor, diminished, and augmented chords, you could also memorize all of your tetrad chords just by seeing them as overlapping triad chords. Because every single triad chord, which are the major, minor, diminished, and augmented chords, is just a variation on one of these 7 color schemes. One of the main advantages of learning chords as color schemes is that you can break up or invert the chord in any way and you'll still be able to identify it. If all you know is that this is a C major chord, you can also tell that this is a C major chord. You can tell that this is a C major chord. You can tell that this is a C major chord. You can see this as a C major chord. This, and this. It doesn't matter which octave or which clef it's in, a C major chord will just always look like a C major chord. To demonstrate this further, let's just imagine that all you did was you memorized your major chords in the root position, and you also memorized how to get to a minor, augmented, and diminished chord relative to a major chord. So you memorized that a minor chord is just a major chord with the middle note shifted down, an augmented chord is a major chord with the top note shifted up, and a diminished chord is a major chord with the middle and top note shifted down. So, if all you knew that this was a C major chord and you were sight reading a piece and you came across something that looked like this, you could figure out that this is actually a C minor chord, because you would see that it looks like a C major chord, but the middle note is shifted down. If you came across something that looked like this, you see this looks like a C major chord, but with the top note shifted up, which means it must be an augmented chord. If you came across something that looked like this, it would look like a C major chord, but with the middle and top note shifted down, which means it must be a diminished chord. Once you memorize your triad chords, you can then learn to identify all of your tetrad chords just by seeing them as two overlapping triad chords. So if you were sight reading a piece and you had never seen this chord before, but you memorized your triad chords, you could see that the bottom three notes make up a C major triad, and the top three notes make up an E diminished triad. And if you then knew that a major triad overlapping a diminished triad made a dominant seventh, you could determine that this is a C dominant seventh. Now, this isn't really how you would actually want to identify your tetrad chords. It makes much more sense to identify them as a triad with a seventh interval added onto it. To do that first, you would need to memorize your intervals. Within an octave on the piano, there are 12 intervals. Half of these intervals are inversions of the other. So a minor seventh is the inversion of a major second, but if all you did was memorize your triad chords, you would also memorize most of these intervals. So if you memorize your C major chord, you've also memorized your major third and your perfect fifth. If you memorize your minor chord, you would know your minor thirds and your perfect fifths again. If you memorize your augmented chord, you would know your major thirds and your augmented fifths. If you memorize your diminished chords, you would know your diminished fifths and your minor thirds. But if you can identify one of these, you can also identify the inverse of it. Show you how. If you look at a C major chord, if you know that from C to G is a perfect fifth, then you know that from G to C is the inverse of a perfect fifth. So this is G to C. It must be the inverse of this. So if you know your perfect fifths, you also know that this is the inverse of a perfect fifth. So you only actually need to know half of these intervals, and then you can just see the other intervals as inversions. So I can put stars next to any column that has a star on the other side. So just by memorizing these four chord types, you also memorize all of these intervals. And the only other intervals that you'd have to memorize are your sevenths and seconds. But your sevenths are very easy to memorize since they have adjacent colors. So if you ever see two colors that look similar, you can just assume that it's a seventh. So here I have some intervals. I'm going to break down how I would identify these. If I saw something that looked like this, I would think that it looked like a C major chord, and since it looks like the bottom half of a C major chord, that makes this a C major third. If I saw this, it would look like the bottom half of a D minor chord, which makes this a D minor third. This looks like the bottom half of an E minor chord, which makes this an E minor third. This interval looks like the bottom half of an F major chord, which makes this an F major third. If I saw this interval, it would remind me of an F major chord, but with the perfect fifth inverted. So this must be a C perfect fourth. If I saw this interval, it would remind me of a G major chord, but with the perfect fifth inverted. So this must be a D perfect fourth. This would remind me of an A minor chord, but with the perfect fifth inverted. So this is an E perfect fourth. If I saw this, it would remind me of a B diminished chord, but with the diminished fifth inverted, making this an F diminished fifth. This interval reminds me of a C major chord, so this is a C perfect fifth. This reminds me of a D minor chord, so this is a D perfect fifth. This reminds me of an E minor chord, so this is an E perfect fifth. And this reminds me of an F major chord, so this is an F perfect fifth. This interval reminds me of the bottom part of an A minor chord, but with the minor third inverted, so this is a C major sixth. This reminds me of a B diminished chord, but with the minor third inverted. So this is a D major sixth. This reminds me of a C major chord, but with the major third inverted. So this is an E minor sixth. And this reminds me of a D minor chord, but with the minor third inverted. So this is an F major sixth. So I'm going to break down how you would analyze this piece of music is if all you knew were your major chords. You see that this looks like an A major, but with the middle note shifted down. So this A would be the root, this C would be the minor third, and this E would be the perfect fifth, with the C being emphasis on the minor third. This would be an A minor because it looks exactly the same as the other part, just inverted. This would be a D minor because it looks like a D major, but with the middle note shifted down one. So this D would be the root. This F would be the minor third. This A would be the perfect fifth. And this D would be part of the root. This would be a G minor because it looks like a G major chord with the middle note shifted down. So this G would be the root. This B would be the minor third. This D would be the perfect fifth. And this G would be the root. Here we have an A minor again because it looks like this part over here. And this G would be a minor seventh relative to this A. Here we have a D minor again. Here we have a C major with this C being the root, this E being the major third, this G being the perfect fifth, and this C being the root. Here we have an F major chord with this F being the root, this A being the major third, this C being the perfect fifth, and these F's being the root. Here we have a C major chord. Here we have the A minor chord again, the D minor chord, the G minor chord again, C major, F major, and you could see this E as being a major seventh relative to this F. D minor again, E major, with this E being the root, this G sharp being the major third, and this B being the perfect fifth, and this E being the root. A minor again, D minor, A minor, D minor, A minor, D minor, G minor, D minor, G minor, A major, with this A being the root, this C sharp being the major third, this E being the perfect fifth, this A being the root, D minor, C major, F major, G minor, A major, G minor, A major, G minor, and a C major third.